right. We all feeling situated? Are we good to go in the back? Are we like thumbs up on this thing? We're taking off? Thumbs up, okay. All right, everyone, we're gonna get started. Thank you all for attending. This is a great crowd and a great audience. Today's conversation about generative AI I'm gonna attempt to be as objective as possible. I'll make plenty of time for Q&A. I have opinions and perspectives about this just like everyone else, but I am an open book and I like to have dialogue with folks. So I'm gonna present my thoughts on this, what I've seen in building in the space. I very much welcome different perspectives and different opinions, so don't hesitate to share those. I think my biggest goal is making sure that this technology gets built right, and I think that requires the conversations that we will have hopefully after this session. I'll give you a little bit of a background on myself. I'm a nerd. I grew up playing a lot of video games. I've got my Steam badge here of 16 years of service. I will not show how many hours I have playing video games because I want to maintain some dignity, right? I have tinkered with computers since I grew up as a kid. I am an optimist, and I found myself at the beginning of the generative AI wave playing around with image generation models. That's how I came to be on this stage, was playing with the technology and asking, what is this going to allow us to do? What is possible with the technology? How can we get more control over it? And that's really what we've built at Invoke and what has given us the perspective of how the technology has developed, where we think it should go. Today's session, we're going to cover some things that are level setting, the GenAI reality. I'll also talk about some stuff that may not be interesting to some folks. We're going to talk about intellectual property and copyright law and all of the stuff that is really relevant in the GenAI conversation as it stands today. And then we're going to talk about GenAI deployment in practice and what it means to use these tools in the game development process, where we're seeing it add value, where we're seeing thoughts and feedback on how it could be done better. And we're still in the process of seeing this technology emerge. It's coming. We know it's changing things. I don't think anybody here, including me on the stage, knows exactly how it's going to change over the next 5 to 10 years because it's changing so fast. I think that disruption, that sense of uncertainty gives almost everybody a sense of continual unease in this kind of changing dynamic environment. But what I want to do today is give you some thoughts and perspectives that will help at least give a foundation to what I see in my vantage point, my position in the space as to what's coming and how to think about it. This is what we were sold with GenAI, right? All our problems are going to be solved. We don't have to think about anything. We push buttons. We get magic. We don't need to work anymore. I think this is a very, very valuable story for AI companies to sell because, hey, selling magic, I'll buy that solution any day, right? You're going to give me magic? Great. I think the reality is that is not what we got, and that's not really where we're at right now. I think the term AI slop is one of my favorite terms in 2025, and I think as an AI company that makes a tool for people to create things, I see a lot of people create AI slop with our tools, right? It's possible to create slop if you don't put effort into it. And I think that's one thing that I will continue to, as a through line in this conversation, we'll be talking about is the human component in using these AI tools, because I do see AI as a tool, and I think it's required in many ways to get to the point where you get something good, when you get art out of it. A lot of people talk about GenAI as taking a model, an AI model that does magic things, and just throwing it into a process, right? We got a pipeline, we got a process, we got a way we do things. We're going to throw AI into it, and it is just going to make magic happen. It's going to solve the problems, and it's going to produce outcomes. The problem is that process part gets messy because it's primarily composed of human processes. It is people using these tools to solve something bigger. Any type of large organization deals with process problems almost all of the time. That's what they deal with, is how to get people to work together, how to get creative ideas flowing between multiple people and orchestrating that to create something magical, to create something good, right? And that's where a lot of the GenAI friction comes in, is it doesn't really look at the human component very often. It treats it as kind of this outsider energy of, hey, we built this thing that does magic, but it doesn't do magic the exact way that you want it to do. It doesn't speak your language. It doesn't help you in your process. And I think that's where we are right now, is everyone is starting to realize that this concept of a model and a process is really only valuable if there's a human in the loop, if a human is orchestrating that process. If you have, for example, our tools in image generation, if you have an artist using these tools, you can create really cool things. You can create art. It is an accelerant to that human creativity, but it certainly can't be a replacement for it right now. Over time, however, we'll have Skynet and it will take over everything, is what some people fear, right? I am not that person. I'm not a pessimist. I don't believe in dystopian outcomes. I think that it's very easy in today's society to get very much in like pro-AI or very much in anti-AI without finding the middle way. And the conversation that requires a little bit more nuance is maybe it's not going to be all good and maybe it's not going to be all bad, and it's going to land somewhere in the middle. And it requires us to have conversations and work together to make it better. And that's where we are right now. This is kind of how I see things going. Over time, though, I do believe that there will be changes. And I think that everyone who's anywhere close to pragmatic or realistic about this is not looking at the technology and saying everything is going to be the same. But I don't think that it replaces people. I think it requires acceptation. Acceptation is a term in biology. It's kind of an evolutionary term, and it describes taking skills or traits that I had in a previous context or environment and growing in such a way that those are value add in a new context, in a new environment. It may be that I used to do the process a specific way, and this is what I developed my artistic skills around. Those skills may no longer have that direct context and may not be using the same tool, but those skills are still valuable in the new context, in the new environment. That is acceptation. It's not just adapting. It's taking what your strengths are and applying them to that new way of doing things. And that's where I think things are going right now, is the people who have developed a really artistic viewpoint and perspective and a creative process, when they embrace these tools and figure out how it can be useful, not just saying, oh, I'm going to change my entire process, I'm not doing art anymore, I'm just throwing it into a prompt generator. When they ask the question of how do I use this in my process, how can I get creative with it, that's when they're applying that acceptation, right? They're taking their old viewpoints, their old aesthetic cares, and applying that into their new creations. I think the implications here are that the biggest limiting factor right now for AI is it's not a technological capability issue. It's not that the technology doesn't do magic yet. It's that it will never do magic the way that we were sold it doing magic. It requires us as people to change. And in broader organizations, what we've seen, the big AAA publishers, the big studios, that is change management at scale. It's an old business problem, which is we've got a new technology and we've got to think about how all of what we do adapts to that and how our individual team members can learn and develop new skills with these tools and exact, right? Take what they have been really, really good at and apply them in a new way. That's where I think the opportunity is right now, is really having these conversations about how do we change rather than just assuming that we can throw AI into a process and have magic done. So we're going to pivot a little bit into the more recent developments in intellectual property. I think IP is one of the big touchy subjects when it comes to AI. It's also one of the big opportunities when it comes to AI, but knowing where things are at is really a valuable piece of information if we're going to have intellectual discourse about it. When we look at legal risks and considerations for using AI, there are really two big questions. The first is the inputs. How do the sources of training on the AI model, the training data set, how do those impact us as artists and impact us as an organization? What are the risks around that? And what are the inputs that we might use in our own process to make these models better? And how do we take those things and mitigate the risk of potential infringement or other issues when it comes to generating assets? The other question is on the outputs side. And really, the question that comes up most often is how do we protect what's coming out of these models? And what do we need to do to change our processes so that we comply with new regulations and new ways of doing this right? The Copyright Office in 2023 came out with a ruling that said anything that is generated by AI cannot be copyrighted. If it is purely generated by an AI system, you cannot get a copyright on it, which means you can spend however long you want. You can spend weeks typing in the perfect prompt, but it's not going to get you a copyright. That's not human creativity in the US Copyright Office's eyes. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that after we talk about the inputs. The big ethical debate right now, I don't think anybody's advocating that the ethical way to do AI is be a big tech company, train on everything under the sun, and then sell access to that. That is not like, there's no real ethical debate there, so we'll just kind of move on past that. The two dimensions of the ethical debate that now remain is the right answer to license all of the data and then sell access to it, or to make the model free and open source, right? The benefits of a free and open source model mean that accessibility to the technology is open to everyone. Everyone can benefit from that technology. It is, in the truest sense, like the Creative Commons, right? You are making something that is a cultural artifact that allows artists of all shapes, sizes, and colors to pull from that to create something. That's certainly my view on what is ethical and the best way to build a technology. It's why we build Invoke as open source tools. Invoke's studio is completely open source. It's Apache 2 licensed, so it's real open source, and you can download and run it on your computer for free. That doesn't have any paywalls or anything like that. That's real open source accessibility to the technology. There certainly are good arguments for data licensing. I think that licensed data sets feeding into a model, it provides some amount of attribution, and I think there's some debates to be had about that. But I think from an outcomes perspective for artists, I'm still of the opinion that the ethical way to do this is make sure that everyone has access to the technology. But we can certainly have discussions about that after our session. Going back to the copyright piece, this is a piece called Théâtre d'Opéra, and it was one of the earliest viral sensations that came out of Midjourney, and it is because it won an art competition. The individual who prompted this allegedly spent, hours and hours, over 700 iterations, I think, or around 700 iterations, crafting a prompt that would generate exactly what he wanted. And the US Copyright Office has asserted multiple times, and as recently as today has ruled on works like this, that if it comes from an AI-generated process, there is no copyright on the output. Period. Full stop. A woman by the name of Chris Kashtanova tested that theory by putting in a number of assets she generated with Midjourney into a graphic novel. That graphic novel was called Zarya of the Dawn. And Zarya of the Dawn was her story. She used images that were generated from Midjourney and comprised it into a graphic novel. She wrote the words, she created the story. The US Copyright Office responded by saying, you can get a copyright on the selection and arrangement of these works. The story that you're telling is your story. But individual frames, like this picture on the right, somebody could go make a t-shirt of that, and there would be no issues with that, because that picture right there is AI generated, and that picture does not have a copyright. So that's kind of another example where you don't really get any protection. Now, Chris came back and tested a new technology that emerged in 2023 that allowed for significant control. It powers a lot of what Invoke does. And she created a sketch and used that sketch to generate a new image. Now, this is where things get a little bit funky, and if your eyes cross when I describe this to you, that's an appropriate response. The Copyright Office said you get a copyright on the input drawing, and that will protect the human perceptible elements of the output, but you don't get a copyright on the output itself. You don't get a copyright on the texture of the skin, on the color of the roses. If you're having a hard time figuring out how to parse that, I think that's reasonable. I don't really know how I could take the human perceptible elements of this out and use that, but that's the US Copyright Office's stance right now. So you get some level of protection over the core concept if you put a sketch in. I think that's like it's a good milestone for us. About 6 weeks ago now, Invoke got a copyright on the first AI-generated image, the first image that was generated with an AI tool. And the reason we got a copyright on this lovely piece of work called A Single Piece of American Cheese is because we used Invoke's Canvas. And Invoke's Canvas offers probably some of the most advanced tools for creative control. Most importantly, though, for us, what it allows for is iteration. It allows an artist to come back and say, not quite that. I want to change something there. I want to draw something new in, and I want to kind of riff with this. I want to use AI as a collaborator to get to where I want to go, rather than as a push-button get picture engine. This is a process. It's a creative process, and we successfully argued that that creative process merits a copyright, that it is human creativity when you're doing that type of iterative work. And the best and probably like most protected that you can get with an AI-generated output would be to combine something like this, where you've done an original sketch, or you have a concept, maybe you have a 3D blockout, a render of something that you want to kind of transform, and you go back and do that type of iteration where you're editing, changing, and deciding how you want that piece to evolve. That's really going to be the most protected work, is when you've combined both of those together. And I think all of that leads up to this point, which is intellectual property is only developed when you have human creativity involved, period, right? Humans are going to be in the loop if, for only one reason, this reason, right, is because intellectual property is what matters in media and entertainment. It is what matters in a content business. And if you have to have human creativity involved, that means you're looking for tools that accelerate human creativity rather than replace it. And I think that's a very important implication when it comes to thinking about what comes next and what is the right way to build these tools. I think with AI, the secondary implication there is that this becomes iterative in nature. You can't just take what comes out of an AI system and be done with it. You really do need to like push it somewhere that it wouldn't have gone by itself. You need to use probably some amount of input material. You need to do the work, right? And that is ultimately what's going to allow you to create something that's not AI slop, is by doing the work. The question is, how do we change how we've done things before in this new context, and how do we really create something that's worthwhile using these tools? So now we'll talk about genAI deployment in practice. We'll go through a couple of ways that you can think about using these tools, how we've seen them deployed. Some of these are going to be more like human-centric, and some of these are going to be more like automation pipelines, but both of them obviously can be used in conjunction, and that's typically where we see the best results. And we'll talk about this a little bit. I'll show you some of the tooling that we have, and then I really want to open it up to conversation. So we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. I'm sure that people have questions. I don't know that I have all the answers, but I certainly have opinions, and I will share them. We can maybe have a conversation. I think the way to look at AI is as a collaborator. If we require that human creativity be in our process, then AI has to be built as a collaborator. It must be built as a way of accelerating what we have in us as humans. And I think when you think about that as an application developer, on my side of things, you have to think about the interface. And there are a lot of conversations happening right now about the interface between humans and machines and what we want that to look like, how we want that back and forth to really unfold. I think when we think about the right interface for this process is, if we know that iteration matters and we know that human creativity matters, then we know that the interface needs to be a useful tool for rapid iteration and creative exploration. We need to be able to come up with 1,000 ideas and see those visualized. We need to be able to choose between them. And we need to really navigate the AI model as almost like an exploration, right? We're kind of unfolding what might be and curating that as that element of human creativity. One way that the tool is being deployed, this is an example of Invoke. There are other tools that have something like this, so I'm not going to sit up here and tell you this is the only way to do it, right? There are other tools that have a canvas. One thing that makes Invoke's canvas a little bit different is that we've built a layers-based system that allows for additional control. So rather than just chucking in a prompt and hoping it knows where you want certain things, you can actually draw a picture, throw in a 3D render, and say, this is exactly the shape of what I want you to generate, but I want you to kind of texture it. I want you to render it, right? And it's almost treating the GenAI process as a rendering engine for your imagination, right? And you're using language to describe exactly what and how you want that to look, but you're providing that control information to guide it. You can also do things like use reference images and specify where you want certain things. So you might have a hard time articulating exactly what kind of desert scene you want, right? The desert's a big place. There's different kinds of deserts, right? You can show the AI a reference image and say, that's kind of where I want that concept. I want the style of this desert, but I want that to be back here. I want this color palette on the foreground. You can do a lot of these types of very intricate and sophisticated controls. We've built the canvas that allows you to communicate all of that creative intent to the AI model when it goes through that generative process. We'll show it in a little bit. But I think the benefit here is that you are compositing all of those resulting iterations. When you say, not quite that, I want to transform this, or I want to add that, all of those are being added as raster layers, similar to a Photoshop. So you are literally compositing all of those AI generations into an output. And it is that composite, going back to the intellectual property piece, that you would get a copyright over, not individual layers, but the overall composited work. The second way that it's being deployed is by using workflows. There are a lot of folks who are very, very enthusiastic about AIs, and they love workflows, right? They love building pipelines. They love building something that's a little bit more procedural. The challenge with most workflow engines that exist out on the market today that are being used in R&D and exploratory development is that they're hard to use as a user, right? You build a massive workflow and it's this big node graph with spaghetti, and then you show that to an artist and they vomit almost immediately, because that's not really what they want to be doing. They don't want to be building business logic or like pipeline orchestration. They want to just use it as a tool. So what we've done is we've built a workflow library, and the people who can build those pipelines, almost like, you know, a blueprint or some other type of template, you're building the pipeline that solves a specific creative problem. It may have a custom model in it. It may have the right prompt terms for a certain problem that you're solving in your pipeline. You're basically just templatizing that creative process, but you're allowing the creative input and control of the end user by creating a small, tiny, easy-to-use UI on the side. You're basically deciding what elements do I want the end user to have control over so that somebody can come in, open it up, and have a relatively easy experience editing that and using it. So this is our workflow system. There are a lot of workflow systems out there. This is another way that folks are deploying this. I think if you look into the future, almost inevitably, we get questions about what's coming. And I think everybody knows 3D is hot. It's a hot topic, right? And so is video. What we're seeing, though, is that images drive all of those processes. When you talk about a video model or a 3D model, professionals who are using those are not just typing text into a box. They are using an initial image, an image that they've typically created, to start the process. So the video model becomes a little bit of like an interpolation engine. You throw it one frame and it extends that. or you throw 2 frames and it interpolates between those frames. So it's really helping you get from point A to point B using kind of some guidance, but it's taking that initial image as its core starting point. And so really 2D asset generation becomes an integral piece of that pipeline. How do I get the right frame? How do I get the right initial image? How do I accelerate that process? When you talk about 3D, most 3D models, if you type in text, you'll get a mediocre 3D model, and the mesh kind of sucks. Those models will get better. The mesh will get better out of those 3D models. But invariably, if we talk about where the pipeline is going, if we talk about how things are going to change, what we're going to see is that 2D concepting and all of the work that goes into that process of making 3D models today, right? You've got orthos and kind of multi-view type character sheets. Those are still extremely relevant. Those will feed a 3D model and give you a decent base. But invariably, you're going to want to make changes to that, right? So you're going to have a process for making edits to that. You're going to have somebody who knows how to. So the modeler is going to have a decent place to start, but is going to be really important in the process of making that high quality. I think there will be some use cases that probably get 3D acceleration before others. I saw a particularly bad 3D model generation of, I think it was Geralt. Somebody had done like a 3D from a picture of him, and he had a kind of like a llama face that came out of it. It was nightmarish. But I think over time, on all dimensions, it's going to continue to get better, but it's still never going to be all the way. And I think this comes back to the power and the importance of iteration. Where and how that iteration happens is the big question, but it's inevitably going to be there. And we're going to find places where the human touch point is able to engage with that process and make those changes to really make the best quality outputs. My biggest takeaway that I hope you leave here today with is that GenAI is a tool. If you look at it as a threat, if you look at it as a replacement for artists, you're not looking at it for what it can do. You're looking at it as kind of this anthropomorphized enemy. But if you look at AI as a tool that's not perfect, and it's not magic, and it can be controlled, and it can be made better, and it can be trained and optimized and tuned, then you're looking at it for what the potential in using this as a creative is. And you're looking at what might become in the future with your process. There are a lot of different ways that people are exploring using this in their process. I think there's, on all ends of the spectrum, high control, low control, automated processes using like a 3D procedural generation thing that goes in. I mean, there's like a whole lot that you can do, but inevitably it's going to come down to the human ingenuity in making this process work for your game. Every game is different. I don't think we're ending up in this like homogenized AI-generated slop fest that is going to be like, every game is generated by AI. I don't believe that future exists. But I do think that if you look at it as a tool, you can ask how your game might be made better with these tools. The old way had a long time frame with human touch points in between. And what AI companies sold you is that we're going to take all of those human touch points away. You're going to have one human touch point. You put the prompt in, you get an output, voila, you got a game, right? That's not the way it's going to work. And I don't think anybody believes in this room, I would bet, that that's how games get created and that's how good games get created. But I think that there is a way to shorten the time frame between those human touch points, accelerating the creative process and getting to that good final end game quicker. And I would even argue that rather than just looking at this as a pure cost optimization and productivity enhancement where we take the same game and we shrink it down to as quick as we can get it, we take some time and ask, how can we get more into this game? How can we make a better game than we were able to make before? And that requires more human touch points, right? I think that is the real opportunity, is asking how we can build better games by having more time, rather than just asking how we have less people on a project. And I think that is the real way that you'll make great games. So that's the presentation for today. This is our website, invoke.com. I'm going to do a quick example. I'm not going to try to like sit up here and do the salesman jazz hands to sell you it. We've got a booth if you're interested in looking more and asking questions, we can do that. But I do want to show you what is possible, and then that will hopefully inform some questions and we can kind of play around at that point. So going to pull my computer up and we'll do that. Maybe I can do this delicately without breaking anything. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go into the application. This is a piece that we did earlier. I'm going to go to our canvas. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out an asset that we're going to start with. I'll maybe ask the question and see what interest is. Do we have a preference on whether we use a sketch or whether we use this kind of 3D frog creature as our initial input? I'm going to take the first person who shouts out. Sketch. Sketch was overwhelmingly popular. So we're going to take this sketch and start there. So I'm going to bring that out. I mentioned earlier that we've got kind of this control layer system, and we're dealing with conference Wi-Fi, so bear with me, bear with me. We've got our sketch, and what we're going to ask now is, what are we looking for the AI to pay attention to? What do we want to use from this image in order to guide the generative process? We have a lot of options. That's what a control layer is. It's basically a reference or an overlay that's going to guide the generative process. I'm just going to use what's called a scribble model. That's going to use an AI to analyze the edges of our sketch. This isn't a particularly perfect sketch. If you've got like clean line art, it's going to work a lot better. But what it's doing is it's looking for the edges, it's identifying those, and it will then use this to control the AI process. It's going to basically tell the AI, thou shalt color inside the lines, a lesson we all learned early in our lives. So I'm going to apply that. We're going to set this up. I'm not going to go into all of the things that I'm doing on the AI side. This like left-hand panel is our AI control panel, but I'm going to use a prompt template. I've got a concept art prompt template, and I'm going to say something like, I don't know, let's have the audience tell me what they see here. What is it that you see when you look at this particular sketch? Does anyone want to give me a label for this? Okay. A kneeling knight. We're going to do a kneeling knight, not in all caps. Kneeling knight. Any like particular aesthetics we want to try to incorporate into this kneeling knight? Anything about his armor or the environment? Did you say twisted medieval fantasy? Okay. I just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly. I find that sometimes asking for twisted medieval fantasy is not safe to do in public, but we're going to do it anyways, because that's what we do when we're live on stage. So I've got a lot of controls. I can tell the AI how much I want it to adhere to this, if I want to have freedom and kind of let it do its thing and kind of interpret this image in a couple of different ways. I'm not going to go through every slider that we have. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit the Invoke button, and it is going to take that sketch, and it's going to process it and apply this prompt as almost like a rendering engine, right? It's taking that sketch and it's visualizing. We're actually watching the AI go through that process right now. So we've taken that, and it has now applied this kneeling knight twisted medieval fantasy in our sketch. And I'm not going to tell you right now that this is perfect. I would even go so far as to say there are some glaring issues with this. But that is why iteration is valuable, and that's what this canvas is built for. So I have the ability to do a couple of variations. Maybe I'll do one more to show you that I'm like switching between these. These are being loaded up into our staging area, and that's basically like you get all of the options and you choose which one is the most appropriate. That process is going to allow you to tweak the prompt. If you want to change colors, if you want to get some variations and then kind of compare or contrast, you can do that. Obviously, we love twisted medieval fantasies here, so we just left the prompt the same. But you can kind of see we've got a couple of ideas that we can play with. I can save these out as new raster layers and use both of them and composite it down, right? I can play with both of them if I want to. I can choose one and go with that. But you can see where the AI is maybe getting a little bit, it's getting some freedom and it's coming up with its own way of interpreting this image. But both of these are foundationally tied to that initial sketch. And we've got a lot of control beyond this, but I'll go ahead and accept one of these as, I don't know, does anyone have a preference? Do we like the dark one or the, which one? 2 or 1? 2. People like 2. People like 2. We're going with the audience faves here, right? So the thing about the control layer is now we're looking at this as an overlay. We can see exactly where the sketch was, and we can see how the AI interpreted that sketch. We can see exactly where that was and how it came to be that this image was created. We can also see where some of the sketch maybe has been misinterpreted by the AI. It kind of like didn't really get what we were going for in that piece. Maybe it was a little bit a messy part of a sketch, and it's kind of like, I don't really know how to make that into fingers or anything like that, right? But we have the ability to come in and say, let's reimagine parts of this. So let's do this. Let's take our bounding box, and what we're doing is we're kind of focusing the AI's attention on one piece. We're gonna say, let's iterate on this one piece. And what that's gonna do is the AI now has extreme focus on this one area. It's gonna produce that asset at a higher resolution. It's gonna jam all of that detail in. So we're focusing right now on the helmet. And I'm gonna say, I want to regenerate this part of the helmet. When it goes in and it regenerates this, because we have an existing image, it is going to transform what we have rather than generate something completely new. And we can say, how close to this do you want to stay, right? Do you want this to be really different? You want to explore some really vast changes to this, still while contouring to our sketch? Or do we want to just make some slight changes? Do we want to make some tweaks? I'll do something that's like kind of in the middle, and maybe we'll change our prompt to say something like bird helmet, because that's kind of what I see with this. And we're going to regenerate just that piece. Now, what you'll notice is when it goes through that AI magic, does that little fuzzy thing, what it's doing is it's controlling that just to the region that we have here, and it's specifically focusing on this. We can then come in and do a before and after. We've got our after and our before, our after and before, and we can see that the details of that secondary generation are much sharper. There's still some things that we probably want to tweak, like maybe we want to go in and fix some of these details that look kind of like nails on the helmet, right? It's not really perfect, but that's where you can then come in, and I'll hide all of our control stuff so we can actually see what we're creating here. I can come in and add a raster layer, and I can just, do the same thing that I've always done, which is, draw, paint, color. You can use a tablet to do this, right? And you come in and pick the colors. You can fix those regions. I'm not going to Excel right now. And we are able to kind of touch this up and kind of fill in those colors, tighten it up, and show the AI what we wanted in the first place. And then when we come back and do that reimagination, right, we'll do the second piece again. We can do it at a lower denoising strength. We can say we don't want it to change too much, and we can kind of have it blend that color back in, still conforming to our sketch, still kind of adhering to that, and letting us go from there. So that's the canvas. That's how the canvas process works. You can obviously do this for hours and do all these little tweaks and edits and kind of accelerate that process. One of the concept artists that we worked with earliest in our journey as a company, the way we set out to work with them was we got all of the artists in a room before we started working with them as a customer, and we said, hey, look, we know that this process is weird and it's going to be scary and there's AI involved, right? So let's have a conversation about that. The first person who spoke up was probably the most vocally against using AI, said, I got some real questions for you, buddy, and we're gonna have a conversation. And he went for probably 30 minutes talking about all his questions, and I tried to answer each of them. He became our biggest champion at that company because he saw how much control he could have and how much it could accelerate his work. He said, a process that used to take me 100 hours, I have gotten down to 4. And I feel like I'm in control. I feel like I could paint that. It's in my style. I know how to do it, but it's accelerated my process, and I can do so much more. We have been able to do projects we would be unable to do because of that time, and that's how they've been able to incorporate it into their process. This is where it's going, right? This is the type of AI acceleration that is possible today, and regardless of where you get your model or how you get it, you're going to be able to use it in this manner. So the real question to ask is, what do you want to do with it? How can you use it? And have you tried playing with it? Because that's going to give you the most answers to all of those other preceding questions. The second piece I'll show real quick, just as a high level, is the workflow piece. Like I said, hold it in. We're looking at nodes. Don't vomit too much right now, right? I've built this workflow. It's my custom 3D workflow. I've built it so that I can take in a 3D rendering and come up with a quick concept. My users who look at this workflow don't have to look at any of these nodes. They're simply going to look at my custom 3D workflow. I've got upload your 3D block out. We've got a positive prompt, and we've got all of the model stuff that we can pick from. So I've threw in this frog creature, and we're going to let the audience decide what we want to do for this guy. Anyone want to shout it out? You got to be loud. You got to be loud. What did I hear first? Pink turtle. I think I had pink turtle. We're going to fuse those together. I don't know what that's going to look like, but you're going to get something. You're going to start to see the good and the bad of AI. So we'll do pink turtle. Anything else that someone wants? No, we're not going to add that one there. We're not going to add that one. No. We're just going to render this one as a pink turtle. What it's going to do is it's going to take this 3D asset, and it's going to give it a little bit of freedom, a lot of pink. And it created our overwhelmingly pink turtle. Pink's a particularly strong word in the English language. I don't know if you know, but if you say pink, it immediately means Barbie pink, hyper pink. We'll take out pink and just see what happens when we do turtle, just so you can see what something normal looks like. But what it's doing is it's taking that 3D asset and it's trying to figure out how to apply that concept to it, right? This is not hard to do. Anybody can do it. They can throw in a 3D rendering and they can apply a word to it. Under the hood, all of that complexity of how I have to navigate the knobs and levers has been done for me by someone else on my team. But this really allows for getting started in a much easier way, because throwing somebody in Canvas that has 7,000 features is basically hey, I want you to go spend a year learning a new tool, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. And one of the biggest challenges right now is people aren't necessarily given time to incorporate this into their process. It's welcome to AI, you have a new tool, and the deadline's Friday, right? And everybody inevitably says, okay, well, I know how to do it the old way. I don't know how to use this crazy new tool you've given me, and I don't have time to learn, so I'm just going to continue to do it the old way. The only way that we do this right is that we make it easy to start using it, incorporate it step by step, but kind of create a little bit of curiosity about, okay, well, this is a cool turtle, but how do I get more control over that turtle? How do I go in and edit it? How do I change the things that I want? And that's what allows you to then go in and play with some of those other tools. So I know that we have about 19 minutes left, if I'm looking at the clock correctly. I don't really want to just show you the tool all day, so I'm just going to say let's open it up to Q&A. There's a microphone right there. You may stand in an orderly line, and then I will answer your questions. If I don't get to your question, I will spend time afterwards talking to you. I'm happy to talk for as long as I need to get everyone's questions answered. This is particularly important to me, so I want to make sure that everyone gets it. We've got one brave gentleman here.
Hi there. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you great.
Great. So I think that I've heard AI as a tool, that phrase quite a bit, and I think I've heard a lot of talk about AI as though it's just a fancy fill bucket tool, and it's really no different from Procreate. And as a producer, I hear from a lot of artists and from the community that it's not that, and that it feels a lot more like it's a replacement, or it's trying to be a replacement. A lot of this talk has kind of eased some of those concerns on my end, but how would you go about speaking to artists and the community to let them know that that's not the goal? And how would you go about maybe talking to the broader industry to maybe ease those concerns or maybe change the direction of the conversation?
Yeah, it's really hard right now. I'll just put it that way. I think we've gotten into a state as a community, as a society, as a global, the world of extreme polarization. So people will just gravitate towards I'm all against it or all for it, right? There's no nuance in the conversation. I think that's what makes things a little bit challenging when you approach it that way. When I talk to artists, I think the first thing that I try to emphasize is the importance of the human in the process to get anything good. I think the AI Slop I don't know if you all see as much of it as I do, but it is overwhelming, right? It's a tsunami of mediocrity. And I think the path for having that conversation with an artist is really getting into some very deeply philosophical questions like, what is art? What is it that you think is art? Is it truly the gradient that is applied from this point to this point? Because if you want to get into the nitty gritty, you could argue that using the gradient tool inside of Photoshop is different than doing the brush stroke yourself, right? Like there's a point at which it starts to get a little bit semantics about like what is a tool and what does that actually mean. I think the other piece that I tend to find is important in really getting to a point where we can have an informed conversation is understanding how the technology works. I have heard people's descriptions. I think it's kind of fun to ask them, how do they think it actually works? Like, what is the actual process? And I've heard such things as the AI goes into a big database of all the images and it photo bashes an image together based on little parts and pieces of it. It's like actually taking those and compiling it on its own. And that is so far from how it works that it's kind of not even a useful starting point to inform that kind of conversation. The reality of these tools are that they have become, in a way, a cultural artifact. They are effectively a dictionary of what, if you take the entire internet and sum it up and kind of get the average of certain words, what that is, like what it thinks that is. It's very, I have the question come up a lot, how do we avoid bias in these models, right? How do we avoid bias? You can't, because the model is inherently biased. It has to be biased. That's how math works, right? It's taking an average. And so it's going to depend on what the data set is. The only way to avoid bias is to make it biased towards a data set we want it to be biased towards, right? And that's kind of the conversation around AI and alignment and a bunch of other stuff that is probably not relevant for this question. I think the only way forward is having a conversation about it. I talked to an educator who said he's trying to teach his students, but his students don't feel comfortable because they think it's cheating, right? It feels like cheating to use the tools if they can do things so quickly. And I think that is really just, it's a stark contrast between older tools, right? Things used to take a lot longer in the past than they do today on a number of dimensions, and we've found ways to accelerate that. I think the important element here is asking questions not around is doing something fast wrong, but really asking about the outcome. What is going to produce something beautiful? What is going to produce art? Where does that come from? Where do we actually get that? And very often I find that it comes from humans doing things that haven't been done before, right? That is the definition of creativity, is creating something that has not been done before. By definition, these models are trained on things that have been done before, right? The only way you can get them to do anything outside of that statistical distribution is giving the ability to control it to a human creative. That's the only way you can really push it outside of that. And that's where I think the opportunity to maybe reevaluate our role in using these tools comes from is, I see where the AI as a tool has become a cliche. It's kind of like, what's that thing that makes me want to punch the screen every time I see it? It's AI is not going to replace you, someone using AI will, something like that, right? It's like, okay, whatever. I don't think those are like useful cliches. I think AI as a tool, I use that definition because that's functionally how I see it, but I think that's also the right way to map it for an artist. I wish I had the answer that would just convince people immediately, but I don't think there is one. I think this requires exposure, and it requires conversation, and it requires deliberate discourse to really get to the core of what we have problems with when it comes to AI as a society, when it comes to things like job loss and change and disruption. Those conversations matter, and I don't think we have enough of them. So that's something that I want to, that's what I'm doing here, is I'm trying to like create a space for us to have that conversation. But I think we need more of that. We need more of that energy out there in the world right now, because we don't have a lot of that. It's very, very polarized. So I wish I could give you a succinct, like, this is the magic phrase that you can use. I don't have it, but If any of those people want to have a conversation, I am game.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Hi.
Hey.
So I see you. It's a powerful tool as a 2D graphic scenes, but also I see it on the website that it can be helpful as for 3D assets, and I'm wondering like, is it similar just like 2D's models? Like, it's easy to deploy and to train the model, or it will take other efforts?
So I'm going to make sure that I understand the question. The question being, can you use this to help the 3D process?
Yeah.
And is it easy to train and deploy a custom model?
Yeah.
Right? Right now, we don't generate 3D assets.
Oh,
You can use this in the 3D pipeline to help with texturing. So the example that I did where we got our pink nightmare and then the turtle, that is a 2D image, right? We've used our 3D asset to create that, but you can take that 2D output and project that back down on the mesh, right? So there are ways that you can use this. There's obviously like the ideation and concepting of what might this look like before I go in and spend the time, but when you think about like where it sits today, you can use this to project it down and start a base texture and hand paint over that and kind of accelerate that piece of the process. That's how people are doing it right now. Where I see it going, if you want to get a little futurist with me, is being able to do the kind of like multi-view from a concept, being able to do like, if you can think of it like orthos, right? And then turning that with a high degree of iteration into the 3D model, the base model that has some texture on it that you then go iterate on in your downstream tool. That's where I see it going, but that's not where it is today. The 3D models that I've seen, universally the feedback that I get is I always have to retopo it, almost always I have to. And it sometimes is like so bad that I wish I'm just gonna start over from scratch, right? You're basically throwing away the 3D model. I think that problem gets solved. I don't know how quickly it does, but I think that problem will get solved, and then it will just become, how do we link these parts of the pipeline together so that we can accelerate it? But not where it is today. 3D, the best I can offer right now is kind of texture mapping and kind of pushing that down.
Yeah, and one more question is like, actually this gives me a feel like, maybe I can do this as well, but I'm a really bad at art. Like,
don't say that about yourself. You can become good, right? We can all grow.
Yeah, like I see like something like Firefly's, Adobe's Firefly, or something like those kind of GenAI things. I think like maybe I can draw some sketches and help me to get what's that word? Help me to express my idea better. And so this model is on the website, or we have to like train?
You can use open source models. We are compatible with a number of them. We're compatible with both the open source free licensed ones that I talked about. We're also compatible with licensed dataset models like Bria. You can use whichever you want. You can train on top of those, and then you can use that to accelerate the process. So we've got a bunch of options that you can choose from, and obviously you can download stuff from the open source community to use those as well.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The one comment I'll make on your, because you said you're not a good artist, you are a creative person. And the question you have to ask is, what skills do you have that can help you express your idea? If you express yourself best in 3D, using 3D as that initial input might be the way that you are able to get control. And I think that's the important piece of this, is that whoever is going to use this in the future is not going to just jump into AI and not learn any of the old techniques or the old skills. It's going to be extremely powerful to be able to draw something good as an artist. If you want to draw something for the AI to help you finish, it's going to be very helpful to be able to render something in 3D and create that kind of like 3D depth, if that's how you want to control AI. you should always continue to grow and develop those skills. Don't give up on yourself. I believe in you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate your sharing. I have a few questions. The first is, are the sketch and the frog made by your internal teams? And if I use another model or image I take from somewhere else and use the tool to moderate it, who's own the final product? Also, because I take it from the other sources, or do you own it?
So I think this goes into two pieces. One is, where did the sketch come from? And then the second is, who owns it? The sketch came from a sketch that I used to kind of inspire the sketch, and then it looks a little bit better, and then I use that in the process. So I kind of leapfrogged or bootstrapped that sketch for the demonstration. The answer to that question of who owns it goes back to the copyright question that we talked about earlier, which is, what went into that and what can you claim ownership over? I would say that the sketch that I used to generate that was relatively basic, and I would not really argue that there's much I own of that. But if you have human iteration, or if you have a significant degree of control going into it, so if you spend a lot of time on that sketch, what you're going to get copyright over is the human creativity that you put in, right? That's what you own. So in order to get copyright ownership, you would need to do a lot of iteration or have a significant amount of input effort before you could really kind of claim it as your own. As far as our site goes, our customers own their data. If they train a model, it's theirs. If they put in an image and generate something from it, the input image, theirs. We don't train it. We don't have a model we're not training on. Thank you. And the output is theirs insofar as they can own it, right? Because if they just use a text prompt, they can't own it. Nobody owns it. It's public domain, right? It's everybody's.
Oh, another question related to human orchestrated. Is there a specific phase for human orchestrated to use that way for copyright? Whatever I draw it from the initial stage, and then I moderate it and use the AI tool, or is that copyright protected, or I take it from an open sources and then I moderate it in my own, showing that I have human orchestrated. So is there a specific phase to consider that copyright protected?
I'm gonna summarize what I understood from that question as to say, like, I want to know where the line is between before and after of I have a copyright or I don't have a copyright. Like, where is that? How much work do we need to do?
Yeah.
And the answer is, I can't tell you, right? Because the way that the US Copyright Office has described copyright is that the moment human creativity happens, copyright bursts forth, right? It's just this kind of thing that happens. You don't have to ask them for it. Copyright has already happened. But the way that they register that is based on a case-by-case basis where they analyze, what did you do? How much creativity did you have? Does that merit a copyright? They're not giving you the copyright. Copyright was already there. They're just telling you, hey, you have it, right? So that's the Copyright Office. You have to do enough human creativity and evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. But my recommendation would be, if you have a sketch, if you do a couple of iterations, you're good. If you do a lot of iterations on something that you just got from scratch and you've significantly changed it, you have a good case to make for copyright. And I do know that we have 3 minutes left.
Yes,
so
thank you.
we're going to try to get through everyone's questions, and then if you've got more, I'll be outside.
Yeah, just as a student, what would you say are things that we need to do to be able to kind of break into a more AI pervasive industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think the advice I give to students often is thinking about it this way. You have the same amount of opportunity and experience to become an expert in AI and using AI in your creative process as somebody who's been in the industry for 30 years, right? It's a new technology. It's a new tool. The only thing that's important is to spend time figuring out what you can learn and trying to learn as much as you can. You have an advantage as a student in that you have something that I wish I had, which was free time. You know, I've got 2 kids, and good Lord, I don't have any time. But you have a lot of it. And I think figuring out, being curious and trying to learn what you can, you have an extremely, extremely good opportunity ahead of you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Hi. With the demo you gave, there was a really great case for the iterative process for a single image.
Is that the pink turtle?
The pink turtle was beautiful. Don't get me wrong. The spooky night was looking at that, it was very exciting.
Yeah.
I'm curious when it comes to consistency through multiple images, if Invoke has any plans or any tools in place to help with that. For example, say I wanted to take that night character and build out like a whole storyboard of him going through like a battle or something.
Yeah, this is what I like to call bootstrapping a concept, right? So you can take a bunch of old IP and train it on that night, and now it knows that night, but you need like 30 or 40 images to get it to understand that. When you're just coming up with a concept, you're kind of trying to start from nothing and develop consistency. We have ideas, and there are ways that we think it could evolve. So there are definitely plans for consistency, and it's one of the biggest areas of research in open source right now.
Exciting, yeah, because I know with the detail on the helmet, for example, with other generation software that I've used, it would like never remember that. So I was just curious what you're thinking when it comes to like those tiny details.
Right now, the best way to do that is to have the human creative, because then you can say this is what that helmet would look like in a different perspective, and that's how you bootstrap that process right now. Is you have a creative drive that. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. We got 0 seconds left. I'm going to answer your question outside, if that sounds good. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you.